Well, earlier we reported how Iran is saying that thousands of nuclear warheads in the stockpile of the nuclear weapon states pose a direct threat to humanity. Now, this comment was made by Iran's ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency at a meeting of the preparatory committee for the 2015 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in Geneva. To discuss that further, we're being joined by international lawyer Edward Corrigan via Skype from Ontario. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Corrigan. Now, looking at how many of these nuclear weapon states do encourage other states to sign on to the NPT, and we have seen review conference after review conference without these states actually practically implementing any of the promises they make, and even going a step further in evolving their nuclear stockpiles. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly the United States talks about urging countries to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but they also sort of wink, wink, said, Israel, you don't have to do it. India, you don't have to do it. I think there is some pressure on Pakistan, because it's an Islamic country that's a nuclear state, to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But certainly there's no real political pressure on Israel to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Americans have been working quite closely with India to expand its nuclear power, probably to counterbalance China. And in response to that, China then is helping Pakistan acquire and improve its nuclear technology. But we're looking at the United States. It's got over 8,000 nuclear weapons. Many of them were built in the 1940s and 50s at the height of the Cold War. It's old technology. It's starting to with old age, it's starting to become obsolete. How do they dispose of these nuclear weapons? How do they dispose of the raw? There's also a huge lobby with the military-industrial complex that wants to get the government and the taxpayer in the United States to spend lots of money to modernize their weaponry. And this is, there's a big push on that. It doesn't really help the average American. It doesn't address the issues of crumbling infrastructure, doesn't help, education or healthcare or many of the other problems facing the United States. But there is a very powerful lobby that supports high-tech weaponry, nuclear weapons. And of course, they've got all these nuclear power plants that are producing uranium and plutonium. They have to have a use to it. But many of the weapons now are 30, 40 years old. This is a big problem. They haven't figured out how to dispose of nuclear weapons, haven't figured out how to dispose of the waste products of nuclear energy. So yes, there is a very, very serious threat. It threatens the environment of the world. And there is this huge, lobby and political force that is trying to keep pushing, an arms race when there really is no arms race. It's one thing during the Cold War when Russia and the United States were competing with each other, but now the United States is competing with nobody. Nobody's even challenging them. The Chinese military budget is a fraction of what the United States is spending in Iraq and Afghanistan. The United States, its statistic, it spends almost 50% of all the money that is spent on the military in the entire planet. And there's no country that threatens the United States. But the United States
Mr. Corrigan, let me just jump in there. The Iranian ambassador to the IAEA has called for the formation of a committee to work on a draft of a legally binding instrument on the illegality of the nuclear weapons. Do you think that is at all possible? Or, in your opinion, considering the influence wielded by nuclear states, specifically the United States, it will continue to make sure that it goes unaccountable in organizations like the United Nations?
Well, I don't think the United States, Britain, France, or even Russia and China, or other powers that have nuclear weapons. If you have nuclear weapons, you're part of an elite club. Nobody can push you around. You can defend yourself. The North Koreans made, I think, a very valid point. They proceeded with their nuclear weapons program. They do have a limited number of nuclear weapons. They're not a threat to the United States or anybody else, but they do have the capability of at least defending themselves to some extent and punishing somebody who would attack them. But a country like, North Korea or Iran, if it even had a desire to have nuclear weapons, it only would have a handful of nuclear weapons. And if they were to use them, especially in an aggressive sense, it would bring about, massive retaliation. Israel is estimated to have over 300 nuclear weapons. It is it has belligerently attacked almost all of its neighbors. I think actually all of its neighbors over time. It's launched many wars of aggression. Iran hasn't actually attacked a country in over 300 years, yet they're demonized by the American media. But it's really quite a distortion. The United States is actually the only country that's used nuclear weapons in anger in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the Second World War. But that was to test the weapons. Japan was already trying to negotiate a surrender agreement with the Americans, but it was to send a message to the Soviet Union and the world that the Americans had these weapons and they were prepared to use them. So I don't think the countries that have them are going to prepare to give them up. And
okay.
I don't.
We're going to have to leave it there. That was international lawyer Edward Corrigan there joining us via Skype from Ontario. Mr. Corrigan, thank you very much for your comments here on Press TV.